It's the last 10 minutes of Uncut Gems, and Howard Ratner is standing in his jewelry store, having already won. He sold the opal. He's already up. Any sane version of this man walks out the door right now with a small fortune and never looks at a betting slip again. Instead, he locks the front door from the inside, so nobody can stop him and nobody can talk him out of it, and puts almost every dollar he has on one more bet. The exact kind of bet that got him here in the first place. The one that's already cost him his marriage, his safety, most of his money, and, by the end of the scene, his life. Not because he needs the money, because of all the money that's already gone. The debts already run up, the favors already burned, the years already spent chasing exactly this feeling. And something in Howard's head has decided that walking away now, a winner, would somehow waste all of it. So he bets it anyway. And it kills him. Literally, the movie ends with him shot dead in his own store, seconds after the bet pays off, having never gotten to spend a cent of it. Everyone who's seen the film points to greed, addiction, a character flaw. But the specific decision Howard makes in that room, pushing forward not despite the losses but because of them, has a name, and it isn't a personality problem. It's something that appears to be sitting in the wiring of the brain itself. And, as you're about to see, Howard is nowhere near the only creature it's ever hijacked. Here's the strange part. Howard isn't stupid, and he isn't uniquely broken. Put the exact same math in front of him with zero history attached. A coin flip, a fresh bet, no prior losses on the table, and he'd size it up like anyone else would. The problem was never the bet itself. It was that the bet had a past. And you've made this exact mistake at a scale so much smaller it never got a movie made about it. You finished a bad book because you were 300 pages in, sat through a movie you hated because you'd already paid for the ticket, popcorn and all, stayed in a job, a relationship, a gym membership, a group project, a half-finished home renovation, long past the point where any fresh version of you, seeing it for the first time, would have said no. The money, the time, the years already spent, already gone, unrecoverable no matter what you choose next. And somehow, that fact about the past keeps steering a decision that should only ever be about the future. So the real question isn't why Howard Ratner is reckless. It's why a brain, any brain, treats a cost that's already been paid as a reason to keep paying. This glitch has a formal name, the sunk cost fallacy. But before psychologists ever gave it a clean lab term, governments had already demonstrated it at a scale that makes Howard's jewelry store bet look like pocket change. In the 1960s, Britain and France jointly funded the Concorde, a supersonic passenger jet built to cut transatlantic flight time in half. Partway through development, both governments' own internal economic analyses showed the project would never turn a profit. The costs had already outrun any plausible return, even in the best-case future. The rational move, on paper, was to walk away right then. Instead, both countries kept funding it for years, pouring in more money specifically because so much had already been spent, as though quitting would somehow erase the money already lost rather than simply stop losing more of it. Concorde did eventually fly, for decades, elegant and famous and adored by aviation nerds everywhere, and it never came close to paying back what went into it. Economists still use the Concorde fallacy as another name for the exact same glitch running through Howard's head in that locked jewelry store. Two national governments, an ocean of engineers, and unlimited access to their own spreadsheets, and none of it bought them a wiser brain than his. More zeros in the budget just means a more expensive version of the same mistake. In 1985, psychologists Hal Arkes and Catherine Blumer decided to see if they could catch this glitch happening to ordinary people on purpose under controlled conditions. In one experiment, they sold season theater tickets. Some buyers paid full price, others got the identical seat, same show, same night, at a discount. Nothing else about the ticket was different. But the full-price buyers went to significantly more of the actual plays over the course of the season than the discount buyers did. 4.11 shows on average against roughly 3.3. The only difference between the two groups was a number attached to a decision made in the past, and it was enough to change how people behaved months later at an event that number had zero bearing on. Then they ran something closer to Howard's actual situation. They gave people a scenario. A company has already sunk 90% of its budget into developing a radar-blank airplane, then discovers a competitor is about to release a cheaper, better version of the exact same plane. Finish the last 10%, or cut losses now. 85% of people said finish it. Strip the sunk cost out of the identical scenario. Just ask people cold whether this plane is worth building from scratch, with no mention of money already spent, and the number willing to invest in it collapses to 10%. Same plane, same odds of success, same expert facing the same decision. The only thing that changed was whether the past showed up in the sentence at all. Here's where this stops being a story about human psychology and starts being a story about biology. In 2018, a research team led by Brian Sweis at the University of Minnesota ran a foraging task, measuring how long a subject would wait for a reward before giving up, on 3 different species side by side: mice, rats, and humans. Once a subject had already committed time to waiting, all 3 species became measurably less likely to quit the longer they'd already waited, regardless of whether quitting was actually the smarter move given what was left on the table. A mouse, a rat, and you. Running the identical flawed math in a task none of them had ever seen a spreadsheet for. And there was a detail in that study stranger than the headline. None of the 3 species factored in the time already spent while they were still deciding whether to commit in the first place. The bias only switched on after they'd already made the choice to go for it. Which means this was never really about valuing money or tickets or airplanes. It's about a switch in the brain that flips the moment you commit to something. And once it's flipped, walking away stops feeling like the smart move and starts feeling like a loss all its own. A glitch old enough and basic enough to be running in a rodent's brain exactly the same way it was running in Howard Ratner's, locking that door from the inside. That word, loss, is the actual key to the whole mechanism, and it comes from a completely different line of research that, once you know it, explains everything you've just watched happen. In 1979, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky published what became one of the most cited papers in the history of economics, showing that the human brain does not weigh a loss and an equivalent gain as mirror images of each other. Losing $100 doesn't just cancel out finding $100. It hurts roughly twice as much as finding that same 100 feels good. Kahneman would later win a Nobel Prize for the work. Tversky had died a few years earlier and, under the Nobel's own rules, couldn't share it, though the committee said so explicitly at the ceremony. Run that finding back through Howard's locked door. Walking away from the table doesn't feel to his brain like keeping what I have. It feels like actively creating a loss right now, on the spot, one his nervous system will register at roughly double weight compared to whatever he might gain by pushing forward. The money was already gone the moment he spent it, but the brain doesn't file the loss then. It files it at the exact instant you finally admit it out loud, which means quitting isn't neutral. It's the single most painful moment in the entire sequence, deliberately saved for last, which makes the rare person who beats this worth a much closer look than the ones who don't. Billy Beane was a first-round baseball draft pick, the kind of prospect scouts build entire careers around discovering. Tools, instincts, the whole package. Everyone around him had already decided he was going to be a star, and he'd already spent years of his life proving them right on paper. Then he got to the majors, and it didn't happen. A .219 career batting average across 148 games. A talent that looked enormous on a scouting report and collapsed under real pressure. Here's the part that makes him the exception instead of another Howard. In 1990, instead of grinding out another season chasing the career everyone, including himself, had already invested in, Beane walked into the Oakland front office and asked for a job as a scout. He didn't wait for the sunk cost to run out on its own, and he didn't need it to hurt any less than it did. He looked directly at years of his own life already spent chasing one identity, decided the smartest move going forward had nothing to do with what he'd already put in, and quit playing. By 1997, he was the team's general manager, and he went on to rebuild the Oakland A's around exactly the instinct that had saved his own career. Ignore the story a player's past performance and reputation is telling you, and coldly evaluate only what they're actually worth going forward, starting today. The man who outthought the sunk cost fallacy in his own life ended up building his entire professional legacy on forcing other people to confront it too. You've got your own version of that locked jewelry store door somewhere right now. Maybe it's a degree you're finishing because you're 3 years into it, not because you still want the job waiting at the end of it. A relationship you're staying in because of how long you've already invested, not because of how it actually feels most days. A show you're forcing yourself to finish, a hobby you keep paying for out of guilt, a business idea you keep quietly funding, a fight you keep having, purely because stopping now would mean admitting that some earlier chunk of your life didn't pay off the way you'd told yourself it would. None of that earlier time is coming back either way. That's the part the brain refuses to accept in the moment. It treats quitting as the act that creates the loss, when the loss already happened days or years ago, the second the time and money went out the door. Continuing doesn't undo a single hour of it. Per Kahneman and Tversky, it just delays a pain you were always going to feel eventually, while risking a matching amount on top of it. There's a reason this glitch is so hard to outthink even once you know its name, and it isn't really about money at all. In 1976, organizational psychologist Barry Staw studied why people escalate a failing decision specifically when they were the one who made the call in the first place, not when they inherited someone else's mess, only their own. His conclusion was that walking away doesn't just cost the money or the time, it costs a story, the one where the earlier version of you was right. Howard Ratner wasn't really protecting his winnings in that locked room. He was protecting a version of himself where every reckless bet he'd ever made had been leading somewhere. Billy Beane's whole second career only became possible the moment he let that version of himself die quietly instead, in a front office, without an audience, without a blood-stained ending. So the next time some part of your life is asking you to stay a little longer, put in a little more, finish what you started, it might be worth asking exactly what you're actually trying to save. Because there's a real chance it was never the time, or the money at all. It was just a story you weren't ready to admit had already ended.